we're gonna start the demo debate. Again, you guys can keep talking. It's just so you have an idea of what this topic is. Oh yeah.
Press start.
I'm just gonna start on my phone. You can look at it.
Just watch.
Is everyone ready? Namely, Mr. Loskamp.
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. My time begins now. New satellite investment may sound like a silver bullet, but history shows it's more of a money pit. Pouring billions of taxpayer dollars into more satellites won't solve the climate crisis, communication challenges, or transportation bottlenecks. It will only waste precious time and resources while inhibiting our current working system of satellites. Thus, Chris and I negate resolved. The United States federal government should substantially increase investment in low Earth orbit satellite networks. Time and time again, our government's satellite investment programs have been massive failures plagued with inefficiency and corruption. The Government Accountability Office explains that the US missile warning system SPIRS faced massive 260% cost overruns, with the first launch date being pushed back by almost a decade. Similarly, Gao reports that NAPOS, a weather program, was canceled after 8 years because in that time, costs doubled and a demo satellite was pushed back half a decade. In both cases, government investment crowded out private companies with nothing to show for it. Even then, more is not always better. William Parker of MIT this year explains there's a limit to the capacity of satellites our low Earth orbit can hold, and that number is set to decrease by over 50% due to greenhouse gas emissions. There's no need to keep throwing money at solved problems. Our opponents will argue that low Earth orbit satellites are critical, but even if that is true, it is not the question of this debate. Rather, this debate is a question of whether we have enough satellites and whether the US government needs to get itself involved. First, do we have enough? The Union of Concerned Scientists in 2023 finds that the 7,500 LEO satellites in orbit today, over 2/3 belong to the US. And even if that is not enough, the NO forecast that by 2040, we're set to have over 60,000 LEO satellites. The private company Starlink is leading the charge. Taxpayer dollars are simply not needed. Climate monitoring is already robust and authoritative via the Copernicus Climate Service. Transportation and navigation are already covered by multiple navigational satellites, ranging from GPS to Beidou. Communication capacity is already developed by the private sector. Worse, we're reaching a bottleneck, and more satellites will only make matters worse. Poldevaro 23 explains that already, the average satellite has to dodge 12 collisions in its lifetime, and in only a few years, with increased investment, each satellite may have to perform thousands of maneuvers. Fuel will be spent weaving through a war zone of satellites instead of performing useful tasks. And if we hit 100,000 satellites, it's very likely the system will simply break down. Indeed, Professor Gaston concludes that by inflating space debris and curtailing optical and radio signals, adding more satellites faces diminishing marginal utility. In fact, the net benefit of launching an environment satellite now may now be negative. And even if you believe that more satellites are needed, US government investment is frankly counterproductive. Policy analyst Nate Shore argues that the US picks winners and losers in the satellite industry and invests in government-owned networks, neglecting more successful private networks. In the end, money is wasted to reinvent the wheel, developing technology that already exists. Investment in satellite will simply waste money that we could put into education, paying down our deficit, or into economic relief programs. Ultimately, we already have enough satellites, and the government is simply not necessary. Our current system already monitors our climate enough, already powers communication enough, and already enables transportation enough. And even where our system is imperfect, the private sector is patching any systematic gaps without wasting precious taxpayer money. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Vote con. Thank you.
Yeah, it died. That's fine.
That's fine.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to start time in 3, 2. We affirm the resolution resolved. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in low Earth orbit satellite networks. Contention 1 is national security. The investment in LEO satellite networks has become a critical need not only for the technological advancement, but also for ensuring national security. With the increasing reliance on satellite communications for both civilian and military operations, it's imperative that the U.S. enhances its LEO capabilities to safeguard its interests against adversaries and ensure operational superiority. The increasing geopolitical competition, particularly from China and Russia expanding their satellite and space capabilities, should be driving the U.S. to prioritize securing its dominance and access in space. For example, Rondelli24 says China's space and satellite investment outmatches NASA's by about $200 billion. Similarly, Rand25 demonstrates China also outnumbers the US's military LEO satellites by over double. Mazur 12 displays empirical evidence that foreign nations have posed threats to US satellites for many years. North Korea and Iran use jammers to block US communications. China uses lasers to disable US satellite equipment. Even Brazilian hackers were able to hijack federal satellite communications, which demonstrates the necessity to increase funding to protect the US interests. If we don't aim to protect these interests, it could cause serious economic damage to federal funding. Currently, the orbital infrastructure market is $400+ billion, but is increasingly vulnerable to satellite attacks. Buran25 estimates that these attacks that cause, for example, GPS outages, could cost the US as much as $1 billion per day. The only way to reverse this is to increase funding. The SDA states a proliferated LEO constellation becomes more resilient just by increasing the number of potential targets. In essence, having a more effectively connected communication system between the LEO satellites and increasing the number of them prevents the disruptions caused by other nations. Contention 2 is economic growth. Investment in LEO satellites is critical for driving US economic growth, job creation, and global competitiveness. Without federal leadership, the US risks ceding $1 trillion opportunity to adversaries. EY24 reports the category value is expected to grow 20-fold from $1.5 billion in 2024 to over $35 billion by 2038. This explosive growth shows that LEO satellites are not a niche industry, but a cornerstone of the global economy. EY further stresses that LEO satellites are seen as the next high growth driver worthy of investments, not just in aerospace, but across all industries. This growth translates directly into American jobs and investment. Florida Today 25 writes, low Earth orbit satellites are a made in America economic success, employing thousands of workers from coast to coast and driving billions in investment in US aerospace. Federal support expands these benefits by scaling production and ensuring jobs stay within US borders. The market is not just large, it's accelerating. Yahoo Finance 24 finds that global LEO satellite market is projected to reach 20 billion by 2027, growing at a CAGR rate of over 15% during the forecast period. That pace of growth means that every year of delay risks leaving US companies behind foreign competitors like China. Moreover, investment drives innovation across the wider economy. Oppenheimer 25 explains LEO satellites are transforming space from a government-only endeavor into one of the most dynamic private sector opportunities, creating an entirely new industrial system. In other words, LEO satellites generate spillovers in telecommunications, logistics, and the digital economy that benefit far more than just aerospace. Finally, LEO networks expand inclusion and opportunity. The Lowy Institute 24 highlights that by bridging digital divides, LEO satellites can unlock a new economic participation, expanding access to markets and education that fuel long-term growth. This demonstrates that LEO investment creates prosperity not just for corporations, but for rural and underserved communities across the US. The impact is clear. With tens of billions of dollars in global revenue, billions already flowing into US aerospace, thousands of new jobs, and the power to bridge digital divides, federal investment in LEO networks ensures that the US captures the benefits of being one of the most transformative industries of the 21st century. Thus to be affirmed. All right. You stand for cross?
Yeah.
Are you ready for cross?
Yeah.
I spoke first. Can I take first question?
Should I? Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yep.
Should I
Alright.
start the timer?
Yeah,
My
okay.
time starts now. Let's talk about your argument on national security. What exactly do these national security satellites do?
So, well, the satellites themselves aren't for national security, all of them, but they allow communication between other satellites. They protect the U.S. from, like, they check other countries for, like, potential attacks.
Sure.
They check other economies and see what they're doing, so the U.S. stays on
Okay,
top.
sure. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
If we had a satellite peering over you, would you enjoy that? What would you do in response? Let's say you're China. A satellite is looking into every activity you do. We add 20 more satellites. Does China just give up and throw up their hands and say, they added 20 more satellites, we can't do anything about it, we'll just let them spy on us?
The thing is, I feel
No,
like...
what they're gonna do is they're gonna redouble their efforts. They're already attacking our satellites. They're only gonna attack our satellites more. And every single time the satellite is attacked, that increases tensions between the US and China and leads to higher chances of a war.
Okay.
Especially right now, with an unstable president, that's the last thing we wanna do.
But what you're doing is you're kind of ignoring U.S. interests. Yes, if a satellite is spying over another country, they will attack. I admit that. But by just allowing China to take out the U.S. satellites, as they're doing right now, we're allowing them to get a better hold in the aerospace industry, and they're also sending satellites spying on us, and we can't do anything about that because we don't have a foothold.
Okay.
So what you're doing
Right.
is you're saying that, you know, the tension between
Sure.
China and U.S. outweigh the fact that China is
Okay.
getting a better
Great.
foothold over us.
I'm
and
gonna
spying
respond
on
to
us.
that, and then I'm gonna ask a question.
Okay.
The big thing you're missing right now is that US interests are not war. US interests are peace. That's why in the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were willing to make negotiations. We were willing to give up our rockets in Turkey in order to make peace. The same thing needs to happen here. If we just keep increasing our satellites, China keeps shooting that down, that doesn't benefit any of us. We get into another arms race where both of us are pouring precious taxpayer money. It is something that is frankly worthless.
Okay.
I'll take a question now. On your
Can I
argument,
respond to you?
I'll take a question. We've been on this for 2 minutes. Let's talk about your argument on economic growth. What does your evidence talk about? Is it about government investment? Is investment happening right now? Is growth happening right now?
No,
Or is it about the
so
private
the
sector?
status quo is that we're not pouring that much investment in, right? The resolution is to substantially increase investment, which we've shown is going to increase like jobs, increase overall industry production, and increase revenue for the U.S. That's a good question.
Okay, awesome. I agree with that. We are not investing very much right now. But what your evidence says and what your case says in itself is that despite our low investment, right now there's still net investment going into satellites. There's still tons of jobs being created. What does that mean? It means that the US government is not necessary to do this. In fact, the US government has been cutting satellites more than they ever have before. They're decking NASA, but still, in the end, satellite investment on net is going up through the private sector, and jobs are still going up, which means the US government is simply not necessary.
Okay,
You can
I'm
take
gonna
a
take
question.
the question now. So you mentioned NEPOs, right? The thing is, and you said that was like a massive investment program failure. The
Yep.
thing is, not only was that like almost 20 years ago, but it also cost over $10 billion for the individual program, while LEO satellites cost from a few thousand to a few million. So how is that like big failure even going to happen when we're not investing
Yes.
nearly as much
The
for a single
answer
program?
was that system was also about low Earth orbit satellites. But even if in theory, the material costs for these satellites are not very expensive, the government is incredibly corrupt, there's incredible inefficiency, and presidents switch up their mind all the time, which is why the government is not the right person to invest. Thank you.
You let him get
I
like
got
two questions
dominated.
in
Oh my
before you
gosh.
got to ask a question.
I got
Don't let him
dominated.
do that to you.
Yeah. That's empty.
I can say
Are you ready?
Wait. Okay. Yeah.
Alright, cool.
Type it in. Unknown.
I'm starting. The narrative of the con is very, very simple. Don't reinvent the wheel. We have satellites and we are already investing in them today. In fact, our private satellite network is larger than any nation in this world so far, and we are on track to increase them by 8-fold in the next 25 years. This round isn't about if satellites are good or have been good. They need to prove that by 8-folding our satellite capacity is not enough, and we need to do more than already 8 times the amount of satellites we have in space. However, if you believe that it is inefficient to add more satellites to the already 60,000 we plan on launching, and that putting in new orders to an already bottlenecked manufacturing and development system that leaves the average deployment delayed by years is bad, and also threatens to completely end future space travel, then you are voting for us. With that, let's go on their first argument on national security. Realize that we are already winning the race, and we have more than 10 times more satellites than all our competitors. So why does their evidence say what it does? It's because they only focus on military satellites. They have conceded that our private satellite network with companies like Starlink that are years ahead of the US government technology far outcompete any other nation. Furthermore, despite what they only look at, which is the investment from NASA, while NASA's investment may be lower, we also have the private sector, which also has higher investment than other nations. Ask yourself, if we spend the money today, when will we see the results that they talk about arrive? The fact is, decades at best. Even if you want to stop an attack today, it will take decades, ignoring delays, to actually see that one satellite actually go up. And that's along with the already 60,000 that will go up. Their solution to the issue is deploying more satellites, but we are doing that already. Putting more satellites only puts our existing network at risk, as each satellite has to dodge on average 12 collisions in its lifetime, a number that will only go up as you affirm. In fact, we would actually do the cost-benefit analysis here. Ask yourself, how many satellites will go down to the hacks that very rarely happen that they talk about versus the collisions that are extremely regular in space travel? We would actually argue that if you want to protect the satellites, you should be putting less of them in space and not increase them to what they're already going to be, insofar as every new satellite you add increases the risks of collisions by many-fold for all the other ones. Insofar as that's true, we would actually say that you're putting more satellites at risk by deploying so many of them, so much as the fact that we don't even need them. The other issue with this argument is the fact that it causes a miscalculation or space race. Look, our enemies hate satellites. They won't just give up when we add more. They'll simply double down and increase efforts in taking them down. You ask yourself, if you're a country and the other country just deployed tons and tons of satellites looking directly into your missile silos and nuclear warheads and straight into your civilian countries, will you sit there and do nothing? No, you take that as an act of provocation, and that causes aggression and tensions between countries. This is the exact same solution that they are proposing. Now, let's go into their argument about the economy. Firstly, remember the thesis on our case, that while investment in satellites is good, the investment from the government is simply counterproductive. And we give you 4 key reasons. Firstly, it picks winners and losers. We invest in companies with the government ties and disregard the rest. So those who lobby the most get it, not those with the best technology. Second, we invest in technology we already have. For instance, our current communication project is years behind private networks like Starlink. Thirdly, the government is super inefficient. There's tons of corruption and there's investment wasted. And fourthly, different presidents change investment repeatedly. Even if we increase investment now, the next president might shut it down. And since satellites take a super long time to deploy, any delays or change in policy is devastating to deployment. Additionally, their evidence concedes that the benefits that they talk about are already happening despite record lows in satellite investments, and the jobs they talk about are still happening. That's because their evidence also concedes that this is through the private sector leading the way. We agree that the money will be hugely beneficial, but this money isn't coming from anywhere. If you believe that investment in satellites is not what we need right now, but rather spending money on things like economic relief programs is much better, then we urge a neg ballot.
Should we take prep?
It's up to you.
Yeah.
Can we take prep?
Yeah, sure.
Wait, can I see the thing where you said like it's gonna increase by
Oh, it's gonna
8-fold?
start.
Like,
Just a 60 thing.
like an 8-fold increase of launches by 2025.
Yeah.
Rishik, I put a lot.
No.
That is a lot.
Yeah, I have it.
That's 4 responses.
Yeah, but
Yeah. In 2022, Dow estimates that there could be more than 60,000 satellites. And right now we have 7.5 thousand. So that's like 8.
oh, that's the 8-fold thing.
Yeah, but we're showing up.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
It's been 45. We're doing 2 minutes, right?
It's up to you guys. You have 2 minutes.
What is
I meant like we have 2 minutes.
what is this?
What?
This thing.
It's market management. They said the private companies are already using it. It's not easy. Yeah, it's 110.
Alright, should I just go?
Yeah. I'll say 115.
So you got like 45 minutes or 45 seconds left.
Yeah.
I don't know what you put.
Just read it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Alright, so first on their point on like the early failures in LEO satellites were because of high cost before the launch prices dropped. Today prices are 90% cheaper because of reusable rockets. On private companies and market dilution, only federal subsidies ensure universal service obligations. Private companies alone don't guarantee equal access. The con prioritizes potential tensions from foreign nations over gaining a foothold in space. We respond that U.S. leadership in satellites, in low Earth orbit satellites, strengthens alliances. In like NATO, the EU, and Indo-Pacific satellites rely on the U.S. More investment means that the U.S. leads the space race. Otherwise, China sets the rules. Global market influence also outweighs temporary backlash from global powers. Then, on their claim that foreign nation backlash can lead to many national security risks, we talk about how vulnerability already exists, but not investing puts the U.S. behind nations like China and Russia, leading to more insecurity. And also, investment strengthens deterrence. More satellites makes it harder for foreign nations to respond. Then, another benefit is on the economy, like we said earlier. DY24 reports the category value is expected to grow 20-fold from $1.5 billion in 2024 to $35 billion by 2038. It's the perfect time to invest. This explosive growth shows that LEO satellites are not a niche industry, but a cornerstone of the global economy, like my partner said. Finally, on space theory, one big argument here is that like the more satellites we put in, the more likely it is that they could collide. But first, mitigation tech is already solving for debris, and the more we invest, the more tech we get. LANL 20 finds that satellites avoid collisions with deorbit thrusters in AI systems, and ANSYS 23 finds that simulation tools improve the avoidance of debris. Technology makes like catastrophic Kessler syndrome scenarios unlikely. Without U.S. leadership, China fills the vacuum. China's orbital challenge to the U.S.-led digital order. Satellite Today 25 finds that China's aim to take the lead in space connectivity. And IISS 25 finds that orbital emissions demonstrate growing strategic competition. China and other global powers are trying to get a foothold in the space industry, so we need to keep investing, like we said. U.S. investment ensures responsible orbital management and prevents adversaries from dominating. Finally, the risk of space debris is severely exaggerated. Room 23 finds that the Kessler syndrome is an unreasonable expectation of certainty. Indeed, results presented by the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee shows an expected increase in the debris population of only 30% after 200 years with continued launch activity. So the NED claims overstate risks. LEO is sustainable with mitigation. This all just shows that there is no harm in voting pro because there's no harm in investing more satellites.
This guy.
Yeah, that's it.
I better mute myself.
Yeah. Alright, Common Cross.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have gotten shot though. You were like
Oh, wait, for the video?
Never
Never mind. I was gonna say for the video, should we all stand up, but
And wasn't it?
Nah, it's fine.
fine.
Alright. Here's your first question.
He wasn't being sarcastic either. Usually
One a little lot. Okay, so can our current like manufacturing and like industry, can they currently keep up with the demand of satellites that we're currently trying to make to like put them in the air?
All we're saying is that like investment now is like the perfect time to invest.
Or I'm asking like, there is already tons of investment into satellites. Given the investment that we already have, do we have the physical capability to keep making them at the rate that we do right now?
But like you were saying, that's mostly like private. So when you're talking like before in class, you said that there isn't enough U.S. for like the production by the U.S. government, right? Like you were saying in class earlier.
Okay.
So
Just to clarify, there's no satellite manufacturing building that the U.S. has in some discrete location where they just put in scrap metal and money and make a satellite. If the U.S. wants more satellites, they will go to another private company, give them the money, and ask them to do so.
Yeah.
The issue with this is that there is already so much demand to put new satellites in the air that the current system is already extremely bottlenecked. That means that we have too much demand and not enough actual supply or ability to manufacture the amount of satellites that we actually
but
have.
doesn't investment increase ability to produce?
Again, you are buying more satellites. You are not buying the company's facilities. You're not buying more satellite manufacturing. When you are investing in satellites, you are going to that company and putting in another order for more satellites. The issue is the stack of orders is already so high that by the time you actually see your satellites that you want to build actually come into fruition, it's going to be like 30 years in the future, and they're not even going to be needed anymore since we already have 60,000 flying around the Earth. But you can have a question.
Hold up, but can I quickly?
Sure.
Or actually, I'll take the question.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, first like in class you talked about how there's not enough production, which proves that like what private companies are is enough, but then you say that there's too much production in your second in like rebuttal, which is
What do you mean there's not enough
like
production?
you said there's like the US isn't investing enough, which shows that private companies are already doing fine, but then you say that
Let's clarify. The argument we present to you is that the US government is doing very little. Now, that does not mean that the actual satellite industry in the US is unsuccessful. Our argument is that the satellite industry the satellite industry is successful because the US government is doing very little. Without your investment and without affirming, we already have the best private satellite network in any nation in the world. Our argument, rather, which you didn't respond to in your last speech, is the counterpoint, saying that US government investment is counterintuitive because one, it doesn't choose who has the best technology and consult its satellite experts. It just says that, oh, you're lobbying a lot of money and I like you, so I'm gonna give all my money to you and give you the strategic advantage. what do we see happen? We see that companies with worse off technology and worse off prices actually get the benefit and get their satellites launched instead. We also see that it's extremely inefficient. A lot of this money is going into corruption or bureaucracy and red tape, and we are spending millions of dollars on bolts and washers that we
That's
don't
3
need
minutes.
to.
Yeah, you also got this.
Alright.
So
Everyone
we've
ready?
got 22 minutes, so yeah, we should be good.
Okay. My time starts now. The thesis of our case is that it's not 1950 anymore. We're not in a space race, and we have more than enough satellites. We have 2/3 of the Earth's satellites. We have won the space race. And even then, they have conceded that we are set to increase the number of satellites we have by 8 times. So even if they think our 2/3 advantage is not enough, we are only going to keep increasing that. Remember, that is all while government investment is at an all-time low. And that's because of the private sector, which is leading the way. Our private companies are so much more advanced than every other country, which is why we're already leading the race, and we're already getting enough jobs, which is exactly what their argument is. But the difference is that when the federal government invests, it actually hinders all of this progress that the private sector is making. And they have conceded 4 reasons. They have not responded a single time to any of them. First, they have conceded that when the federal government starts investing, companies focus less on developing their own satellite technology, rather they lobby the federal government. Because what the federal government does is they invest in companies that pay them a lot, which means that this rampant corruption is actually decreasing the effectiveness of the satellite industry. Second, we're simply behind the private industry. When the government builds technology, they build communication technology, or they build military technologies. These technologies are decades and decades behind private companies like Starlink. What does this mean? It means we're investing money in a place where we simply do not need more investment because the private sector is already doing everything we're doing. We're simply reinventing the wheel. Third, they have considered the government is frankly far too inefficient. We cannot develop at the same scale as private sector. We do not have the same incentive structure, which is why our government investment is not as high right now, but the private sector is still winning. Fourth, they have never once contested the fact that every single time a new president comes in, they always switch up the policy entirely, which means that even something is finally working for 4 years, after the new president comes in, they might just get rid of that whole program, which means that we can never actually make any progress long term. This has manifested in reality. This is why the Impose program and the Spurs program have both taken decades and decades, but still produced nothing and just wasted billions of dollars. They make 2 responses to this argument. First is that satellites are 90% cheaper. Again, even if satellites are 90% cheaper than 1950, it doesn't matter because now we're making tens of thousands of satellites, not just a single set. Oh wait, summary is
3 minutes.
Oh, is summary 2
2
minutes?
2 minutes.
On local circuit?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
I
Yeah.
don't know that either.
Okay,
Are you gonna take prep for final figures? Or can I just use it?
Yeah, no, use it. Because you have to
I'm just gonna take 45.
45?
Too
Okay.
much.
Wait, did y'all even use any prep so far?
I haven't used any.
Oh my gosh. That's awful. Alright, I'm just gonna use it. I'll start now.
We're just gonna choose one.
Yeah, all the crossfires are 3, but the final focus and summary are 2.
Okay. Everyone ready?
Yep.
I'll start. What the heck? Oh, okay. I'll start time. Judge, so far the opponents have made a number of responses to our arguments, but they don't understand that investment solves for them. On market dilution in private companies, they claim that it's not unique, but federal subsidies have proven to only help with the aerospace industry specifically. On their argument of past failures, we can ignore this because the example they gave was not only outdated, but the satellites built back then used completely different materials and blueprints from now, which led to their failure, unlike what will happen if we invest today. Then on their claim that more satellites don't help, we know that the US satellite constellation is very spread out, making it vulnerable and increasingly easy for countries like China and Russia to take out vulnerable US satellites, which is what they have been doing since it's the status quo. The response to our national security was that we would pressure foreign nations into responding by producing more satellites, but this is wrong. As our evidence has shown, more investment leads to a strong constellation which mitigates foreign attacks. Choose the U.S.'s safety over potential backlash. The opponents say that the U.S. already has the best satellite network, but they don't consider that the U.S. is outnumbered by foreign nations fourfold in military LEOs, which are proving the U.S. satellites unable to do anything. Then, the opponents continue talking about private company access and equality to investment, but only federal subsidies ensure universal service obligations. Private companies alone do not guarantee equal access. In reality, the private sector is not still winning. It's actually hard for them to make any progress. We outweigh on the economic impacts. Even if we consider the opponents' arguments, it's undeniable that their impacts won't trigger, since investment in satellites solve for them. Job opportunities and national security always outweigh potential backlash from other nations and the potential non-uniqueness of investing, which already has been shown to not be true. Thus, we affirm.
Yeah, we can do a grand
I don't
crossfire.
have anything written down. I was just going.
And in going, that was actually pretty good.
It was?
Yeah.
No, only the last part. Was,
The last
Do you guys want to snap?
Oh,
Yeah.
is it final
So-
focus?
Grand
Grand
crossfire.
cross. Okay. Oh, I got confused. I thought the other one was grand cross. That's why I said.
You two can take first question.
Okay, I'll start time. So just starting off, I'm gonna go back to that the Nepos programs and the early failures. So as I've said, all those failures were because we weren't as developed and we used completely different materials, which led to implosions and then not actually working. So what's your response to the fact that we're gonna use completely new and improved blueprints, which also mitigate collisions and debris, which...
A couple of things. First of all, you paint the picture that Nepos was this thing that happened decades and decades ago at the start of the space race. That is simply not the case. Nepos shut down in 2010, which means as recently as that, we still had issues. But even more, if you look even more recently, just 3 years ago, Spurs shut down for the exact same reason. 260% cost overruns, decades pushback of launch, billions of dollars wasted. Now, your argument is that this time it's going to be different. After trying for maybe the 10th time, now our new blueprints are going to finally solve the issue. But the problem is, this is not a question of technology. It doesn't matter how good the technology is if fundamentally our system, our government is too inefficient. If every single year, every 4 years, a new president comes in and shuts down the existing programs. Every single time one of these happens, things break. It doesn't matter how good the technology is if the manufacturers are not good enough. Okay, we'll take a question now. Chris, do you want to ask one? Yeah. Okay, sure. Let's talk about your argument on the economy. You say that many jobs are being created. Where are these jobs?
So obviously they're not being created right now. They're going to be created with investments.
Your evidence says they're being created right now. So where are the jobs being created?
The job, okay. I meant that even if they are being created or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is the amount that are going to be created if we invest into the aerospace industry. Because right now, let's say even if we're losing jobs, which we're not, but there are more jobs being created. But that doesn't matter because they're not nearly as much as the amount that will be created when we invest. That's our whole point.
Okay, here's the issue with your argument. Your argument is that more jobs are always a good thing. However, that is simply not the case. More jobs only matters when there's somebody to fill those jobs, when somebody out of a job needs a job. But guess where you're creating jobs? When you're investing in satellites, you're investing in the engineering industry. Engineers who are already sought after, there's already too much demand for them, they're getting more jobs, which is not changing the fact that unemployment rates are high among the low income. You're creating jobs for the people that already have jobs. You're not creating any jobs for the Americans who actually need it. Which is why we propose, instead of investing in things like satellites, there are better places we can put our money. Every single taxpayer dollar we put in money is taxpayer dollars that couldn't go down to paying the deficit, or improving education, or helping with economic relief, all of which are far more helpful for the economy.
What you're assuming is that every What you're assuming is that every engineer that needs to fill a role or any engineering position we add will only be filled by people who are currently out of a job. But we know that a lot of engineers in high paying roles, those jobs people who could go into the job are actually in low income jobs because they can't get there.
That's right.
Oh shoot. Alright.
Oh, we have one.
Alright, so we're ready.
Yeah, the Ferris already hit to all the words, all the
Fine.
terms, and all of that. Wow.
The fundamental thesis of this round is very, very simple. Don't spend billions of dollars trying to reinvent the wheel. It has been conceded that we've done enough for satellites today, and even if you felt like we didn't, that's okay because we're going to increase them by 8-fold as of 2040. In a world where we already have too much investment in satellites, clearly affirming doesn't change anything. And any satellites we do invest in will take decades to create, as the current system is already bottlenecked. For example, we give you the example in 2010 where NOPES shut down because of billions in wastage, and just 3 years ago, SPURS failed and it had a 260% cost overrun. Remember, this isn't decades ago, this isn't outdated blueprints and technology, this was 3 years ago. Now, they've conceded 3 reasons for this being the case. Firstly, they say that federal subsidies helps aerospace. However, we tell you that this is actually the opposite. Firstly, they've conceded throughout this entire round that the industry picks winners and losers. If I'm a satellite that wants to stay competitive in a world with government investment, I will now pour half of my budget into actually lobbying for contracts rather than the R&D to create good satellites. They have also conceded that the government doesn't care who makes the best satellites. They would rather pick someone that lobbies them more rather than pick the person with the best satellites. Secondly, they have conceded that we're investing in technology we already have, and our current communication project is years behind the private sector. Thirdly, the government is super inefficient because of things like bureaucracy, all of which was conceded. Now, let's go to their argument. Firstly, on this idea of the space race, they have conceded that it only angers our adversaries and causes miscalculation. Our enemies hate satellites, and putting more military satellites in the air to spy on them will only make them want to shoot down more, something that has been conceded. And on the economy argument, one word: bottleneck. They have conceded that already the satellite industry has too much money and they do not even have enough people to fill the jobs that they already want to have. You are not creating anything more, but rather causing a trade-off from good programs like welfare and economic relief.
So it's less about the word count and more about like whoever your first.
Alright, we don't got it.
Okay, what really is this?
You gotta go now because you don't have your
According to the time that you're taking to speak. So once you have my speeches written out, read it out. Read it out the first time. You're gonna be raising your hand, but walk up this time. You're not gonna lie. You're just gonna go. If they come around enough, yeah, you'll get. The judge will say that that's not smart. You don't want to be. You need to stay without time. I think the sweet spot is like just a constructive form, right? And
Alright, so first, like we tell you on the economy, now is the perfect time to invest. The category value is expected to grow from $1.5 billion in 2024 to $35 billion by 2038. On debris and collision, our opponents again continue that they say that failures will happen now. They also say that these companies that shut down recently are proof that modern tech won't work. But the failures the opponents described happened far earlier than the time the company shut down. Also, we were never trying to paint the narrative that these failures were decades ago. We're in fact trying to say that they did happen recently because that shows that we've advanced a lot since then. Like we were talking about the cost decreasing by 90%. They also didn't consider our response that subsidies will help. Federal subsidies only support struggling private markets. Only federal subsidies ensure universal service obligation, and private companies alone don't guarantee equal access. We also tell you that the cost is by far worth it. First, not only has it decreased by 90%, but also federal investment is the seed for private innovation spending. The finances required for investment are short-term costs for long-term improvements in internet communications and defense security. We don't have too much investment in satellites. Like we tell you, there will only be a 30% possible increase in debris after 200 more years of continued investment in production, so there's no harm in voting pro, because more satellites will not risk any debris. That's what we tell you currently.
no, I'm just agreeing.
Can you